Thank you so much for being here. I want to also echo thanking all of the institutions that have made this possible, all of the organizers. I have been so just amazed with the graciousness and the level of organization and just the level of thoughtfulness that has gone into this conference. It's been a real pleasure. I was here last week for the camp, and I would actually really love to also especially thank the camp attendees, because the vibrance, the energy, the level of engagement was just amazing, and it really inspired me. And it's also, this paper, you should perhaps hear some of the echoes of what we did in the camp, and it really was actually, I think I wrote it for you all. I apologize if there are any repetitions, but hopefully there'll be good creative ones. So there are, I think, maybe two things or projects in the background of this paper, and I want to just sort of mention them in passing. So one, I've been working with a group of international scholars and quantum physicists in Canada on a project of Deleuze and cosmology. And so we've been really, over the last 5 years, talking about how we can have sort of resonances and what we can learn from each other, and how quantum physics is something that is still a very sort of new and in process kind of area of research, and there are many different sort of interdisciplinary tensions in that field, but also how, sometimes, what can philosophy and science learn from each other, and how can they communicate and creatively, hopefully. The other project I'm working on is a book that I'm trying to write at the moment, and it comes from my engagement with feminist theory, and in particular, feminist new materialisms, and from my orientation as being both a Deleuzian and a feminist. And so, thinking about both the resonances, but also the places where there might be tensions. I'm inspired to some degree by the provocation. Elizabeth Gross, she wrote the book, The Incorporeal, and she said something, I think, rather, at least for me, profound, where she says that new materialism has trouble talking about the incorporeal. And so the larger project, and perhaps through the title you might see, I really think that there's a need, and especially to go back through Deleuze, because I think there are resources in Deleuze and Guattari, to think about, if we have a new materialism, and we're talking about new materialism, maybe we need to also think about a new idealism, which, don't cringe. But I know that word, perhaps, idealism, is a little bit sort of passé for some, but I think that there's really interesting things to be done with thinking about thinking. So I think that's all I want to say as a beginning. So I'll begin now. So this is Deleuze, The Future of Thinking and Thinking of Imminence. Yes. Well, I think that was actually my beginning slide, so we'll go to slide 2. So in this presentation, I consider the manner in which quantum physics has been utilized in service of philosophy and how it may transform philosophical thinking in the process. Theorizing the implications of quantum physics has become something of the new hot ticket in many enclaves of philosophy. Karen Barad, for instance, uses quantum theory to develop a materialist, post-humanist performativity that contests the dualism of mind and matter, and the Deleuzian concepts of the virtual, the molecular, the imperceptible, and becoming have also been likened to quantum phenomena. Inspired by observations that quantum fields have spontaneous activity which fluctuates in intensity and direction, and that it's only through relational interaction that phenomena form into particles or their behaviors can be delineated, Barad derives that there are no self-standing entities, but rather an incessantly intra-acting series of relata that themselves do not precede the relations of which they are comprised. These relational particles are always open to other particles in their constitution and action. Thus, there's a performativity or agency afforded to matter itself. She claims that, quote, matter only truly exists relationally, and if we want to develop a deeper understanding of the world, we should investigate the processes of material formation, the mattering, rather than the final forms. Deleuze prioritizes multiplicities and difference, suggesting that entities are always composite and open to transversal relations, and views reality as composed of rhizomatic connections which incessantly coagulate, accumulate, diverge, and reassemble. Ontologically, Deleuze privileges the between of entities, suggesting that becoming does not merely describe a simple combination of two entities into a larger whole, but that the entities are themselves generated out of a relational matrix through the encounter, transformation rather than addition. Similar to quantum fields, within which one cannot specify particulars prior to an encounter. Deleuze's ontology includes the virtual, which specifies a state of reality which is yet to be actualized, which could be likened to a quantum state prior to decoherence. For Deleuze and Guattari, there is always an excess beyond present, actual, or completed substantialist forms, as bodies are forever entering into encounters of composition and recomposition. Thus, it appears that quantum physics could provide a scientific, material counterpart for their philosophical critiques of the traditional substantialist view of being, which posits fundamental substances or basic entities as some sort as the ground of reality. So Barad argues that we should apply the lessons of quantum theory concerning the behaviors of quanta to explanations of all sorts of molar phenomena, saying, quote, "The world is an ongoing interactive engagement, and bodies are among the differential performances of the world's dynamic interactivity in an endless reconfiguration of boundaries and properties, including those of space-time." So this supports the new materialist critique that matter has been relegated to the status of inert, passive stuff to be manipulated by mind, culture, and language. And just as a caveat, I'm very sympathetic and very inspired by what the new materialists are doing. And this is not meant to be sort of a full-on sort of rejection, but an engagement. And it will be, in some ways, I'm trying to pull out some of the tensions between sort of some concepts and ideas in Deleuze and new materialism. But I'm very also grounded in the project of reconceiving and sort of bringing material and materiality and bodies and embodiment back into the forefront of philosophy. So I don't want to in any way give the impression that I'm not. Extrapolating from quantum indeterminacy, we're justified to assert a greater degree of flexibility and dynamism to matter. This view of matter as dynamical eliminates the need to refer to agents or minds, absorbing the attribute of thought or rendering it obsolete. Through her appropriation of Niels Bohr, Barad interprets the role of observer and apparatus, which he associates with the irreducibility of the components of the scientific experiment in the phenomena itself, as meaning any material configuration or encounter whatsoever, eliminating the need to posit a mind or perceiver, let alone a human mind. So the interpretation of Barad of Niels Bohr. Now, some might assume that this is the same project as Deleuze, for whom the concept of imminence suggests that there can be no hierarchical relations or aspects of transcendence between mind and matter. And this is certainly how Manuel Delanda understands Deleuze's project, claiming firmly that Deleuze is a neo-materialist who reconceptualizes matter as active and self-organizing. Delanda, for instance, attributes to Deleuze, quote, "a rigorous philosophy of physics as the basis for a reinvigorated materialism." Coupled with this view is the idea that Deleuze is proposing a form of scientific realism which describes a mind-independent reality of the genesis of form through dynamic processes and abstract structures. And this would play well with Barad's view that the behavior of quantum phenomena gives a more accurate model of reality and immanence, eliminating the need for any vital principle outside of matter itself, her agential realism. Our theorizing should strive to parallel these more accurate descriptions of physical reality. But if this is so, the question might be raised, what does philosophy do that's different from science? Oops. Yes. So this quote, I think, is really interesting, and I put it here, I think, for those of you who are in the camp, this quote encapsulates a lot of what it is I get to at the end of those 3 lectures, which is really thinking through a kind of way of thinking or an image of thought that incorporates the ideas of the cosmic artisan, the divination that I was talking about, and this new image or imageless image of thought. Also, I think that philosophy needs to, in a way, become art, or at least artistic, in order to sort of begin to think. So I've got it up there in the background, but I think I will read it because it's just so beautiful. This is from Paul Klee's On Modern Art. And maybe you'll hear some resonances, those of you who are at the camp. To each dimension, as with the flight of time, it disappears from view, we should say. Now you are becoming the past, but possibly later at a critical, perhaps fortunate moment, we may meet again on a new dimension, and once again you may become the present. And if, as the number of dimensions grows, we find increasingly difficulty in visualizing all the different parts of the structure at the same time, we must exercise great patience. This phenomenon of many simultaneous dimensions, which helps drama to its climax, does not, unfortunately, occur in the world of verbal expression. A little farther down in his treatise, he says, it depends upon the mood of the artist at the time of which of the many elements are brought out of the general order, out of their appointed array, to be raised together to a new order and form an image which is normally called a subject. So, of course, as we know, Deleuze was actually quite taken with Paul Klee, and many times people will quote the famous not to make visible, I'm going to botch it, to not paint the visible, but to paint the invisible, or something like that. Okay, we all have that. Anyway, I think this is actually much more rich of a set of ideas, and they are in the background of what I'm going to present now. So this section is Deleuze philosophy and cosmic artisanry. Deleuze and Guattari differentiate philosophy and science by saying that science is defined by reference to or description of reality, whereas philosophy is defined by creation and transformation of concepts and thoughts to, quote, not only comprehend the virtual differences of our world, but to enter into the play of virtual differences and transform them. Actually, that's a quote from me. The question of what can only be philosophized or what philosophy does that's different is an important one that seems to be missing in Barad's work. The difference is that Deleuze is addressing both the question of what reality is like, what he calls imminence, but additionally, and perhaps more crucially, acknowledges the problem of how we can think it at all, which is why the concepts such as the virtual, molecular, the imperceptible, and affect are such primary considerations for him. Deleuze's aim goes further than just to transform the dominant image of thought in philosophy away from its substantialist roots to a more materially accurate relational one. His fundamental questions include aspects that seem congruent to dealing with the revelations of the quantum world. How do we think that which is imperceptible? How do we think relation and process as the fundamental aspects of reality as opposed to substance and form? How do we think virtual probabilities as opposed to solely identifying the actualized points of manifestation, particles, and location? But I don't think, as advocates of Deleuze's scientism would say, that what Deleuze is doing is just providing a metaphysics to accompany the new physics, or merely providing philosophical concepts that reference the ontological reality. He's concerned with the transformation of thought, imagining a new image of thought and creating new paths of thinking, which is inextricably linked to creativity and art, a cosmic artisanry. He's providing an image of thought that is better suited to think motion, paradox, and virtuality, an image of thought that constructs planes of imminence and widens the framework of these planes to include more of the chaos and indeterminacy that inheres within them. So a bit about contemporary physics. A few things that I've gleaned about the state of contemporary physics from this project that I mentioned. We've been working together for about 5 years now. First, the realizations of quantum physics have not been commonly absorbed. Outside of physics or even the classroom, I have peers at my university in the physics department who want nothing to do with quantum physics and insist that it's irrelevant for real life. It's a conversation that I had. Still, it's becoming more acknowledged that quantum theory requires, quote, a radical transformation, radical innovations in epistemological and metaphysical thinking, even within physics itself. Third, quantum physics illuminates that there's a horizon at which reference ends and imagination begins. So let me explain this by referencing a talk that Arkady Plotnitsky gave at a recent conference on Deleuze and cosmology, the conference that was just held in May. I was one of the organizers of, along with some of my peers who are in the audience today, Michael and Kyle. He stated that the revolutionary aspect of quantum physics with respect to a traditional scientific outlook is that we have entered a scenario where there can be no direct observation. So, I mean, this is the sort of the gold star of science, that it is something that requires direct observation, experimentation, and that is how theories are made. So he says, every attempt to refer to quantum phenomena first must be translated through the experimental apparatus. This is at once the heart of the problem of measurement that quantum physicists have long understood, that the measurement itself is an integral, eliminable element which speaks to the uncertainty principle, that one can never measure both speed and location at the same time. And it points to the fundamental fact that observation itself creates a situation where the wave-particle superpositionality decoheres. In these experiments, what's often being measured is the result of the encounter between particles that gives off an effect. With the use of super-sensitive equipment, we can map out these effects and know that some particle interacted with another. It's a kind of imaging that requires an extreme amount of creativity in how we set up experiments in the first place. Moreover, quantum physics is exploring a fundamental assumption about the nature of the universe that has never been observed, that of dark matter, which has been theorized as a necessary component of the universe due to the particular gravitational fields observed around objects in deep space. These experiments are imaging not only ways that we might be able to finally discover dark matter, but also imagining what the candidates for dark matter could even possibly be. So there's a sort of almost reversal with quantum physics of the entire sort of priority schema of science itself, right? And I think that's really fascinating and could be something really important to inspire both philosophy and future scientific thinking that itself could become sort of cosmic. For example, I think that somehow okay, here, I'm gonna leave it there. For example, Robert Feynman is credited with revolutionizing physics with his visual diagrams, which are tools or images used to simplify particle calculations. To give an idea, the collision of subatomic particles happens at billions of times per second, where the interaction of particular subatomic particles creates particular scattering patterns, which Feynman's diagrams help to simplify. So again, I mean, there's no way that one can actually observe these collisions, or with the naked eye, or even with the help of most of our equipment. So there's a way that we have to move to sort of the creative and the imagistic and artistic in order to even have a relationship in thought with what's going on. He knew that to think a general covariant quantum field demanded a huge shift in how we think of the world. It's beyond observation, beyond, as he says, the capacities of our brains to, quote, recalculate coordinates and time when we move at the speed of light. Beyond our common logic to hold the infinitude of virtual or potential paths of particles as simultaneously real. Even though Feynman seemed to think that philosophers were tourists rather than explorers, and this is a quote from, he's actually given a lot of really interesting, what I would say, philosophical lectures, but he actually said this in one of those lectures. So we are tourists rather than explorers. His continual searching for language and a manner to visualize the imperceptible says otherwise. Philosophy has a place at this juncture. Rather than being a matter of philosophy or philosophical concepts needing to refer to physical properties, it's a matter of providing us answers to how we can think this new reality that is profoundly beyond our capacities to experience it directly. This is the imaginative aspect, to find images of thought that allow us to think beyond the standard view of reality or traditional views of philosophy, finding new concepts and new ways of thinking, visualizing, conceptualizing what has not been definitively sorted out, and projecting this into our considerations of the possibilities of thought itself. Imagination, visualization beyond vision, and transformation of our capacities to think. This is where Deleuze's philosophy most certainly resides. So, new materialism in thought, the application of quantum mechanics, and what is Barad doing with quantum physics. So, not incidentally, the nature of thinking is where the theoretical positions of Barad and Deleuze differ dramatically. New materialists looking for a way to reconcile their materialist ontologies with thought and meaning rely almost exclusively on the foundation that Barad sets, grasping hold of the idea of quantum theory providing a more attractive method of explaining the materiality of thought. For Barad, only practices matter in how the world materializes, and concepts are solely material configurations. But rather, for Deleuze, it insists that concepts have an incorporeal and thus portable aspect beyond their adherence in any particular material configuration, and reserves an important role for thinking to new frames for mapping and organizing nature's chaos. This goes beyond merely referring to physical cause and effect. So that's the difference that I'm working with here. So the concept of mining quantum theory for how it might change our understanding of thought is an attractive one to me. And the idea that the quantum world might demystify the workings of the mind or provide a model that brings materiality and mental existence into greater confluence is kind of tantalizing. So I've been reading the work of Robert Penrose, and he's trying to do exactly this. And I can't get into that here, but it is quite fascinating. Yet such explanations, and I count Barad's among them, remain committed to and stuck, I think, in the traditional materialist conundrum of explaining thought in solely materialist terms. And to be clear, the problem of resolving metaphysical dualism or providing a physicalist explanation of thought is not really Deleuze's purview. His focal point is what it is that we're doing when we think, and how can our particular manner of thinking be expanded or transformed? What are the possibilities of thought, in other words? So before moving to these considerations, I have a few more words to say about Barad and what she's doing in quantum theory. Barad believes there is a case for attributing quantum properties such as indeterminacy and entanglement to all levels of material event, micro and macro. And she wants to derive an ethical premise, and am I there? Well, we can be there. An ethical premise from this ontological shift, appreciating radical and fundamental otherness as the model for self-identity as paradoxically non-coincidence of self. So the non-coincidence of self is really sort of, it generates this ethical position of humility and sort of radical openness, right? And continual revision, all of which, are promising, and I'm not in any way sort of fundamentally critiquing those particular trajectories and intuitions in terms of thinking and philosophy. But there's a reductive slippage between the quantum phenomena of entanglement and what amounts to a lay usage of the term. And I see this more so in the way that entanglement has become a kind of buzzword within new materialism, and it becomes sort of where we seem to be taking talking basically about the regular forms of material intertwinements. So she talks about specific material relations of the ongoing differentiating of the world. Now, if we look at examples from new materialist art, or analysis of events, they're often focused on taking of a set of materials together to understand the whole. And entanglement seems to be something like being with or gathering together, hardly resembling anything like quantum entanglement. The slippage is even more acute with the concept of diffraction. So even though Barad says that there's a kind of way that she wants to use these phenomena of quantum physics quite literally, that they actually can be sort of identified both at the molar and the molecular level, when we actually say some of the theorizing, it really sort of devolves into something that's a little bit more just like basically things kind of go together or they're intertwined. So Barad transfers diffraction, for instance, to the realm of methodology, using it as an adjective for her style of interdisciplinarity, saying diffraction is a material practice for making a difference, for topologically reconfiguring connections. Yet there are all manner of metaphor and image that could do this work. What specifically does quantum diffraction do for Barad? There are distinct phenomena which arise from quantum diffraction, i.e. interference, superposition, and entanglement. And these are the strange behaviors to which many refer that do not map easily onto classical theory. Barad translates the implications of these strange phenomena to a methodology, a method of reading that poses, quote, neither benign agreement nor oppositional antagonism, and an epistemological stance that champions, quote, fuzzy appreciations for non-coherence, of rueful acknowledgement of both willful and unintended misunderstanding, and of sensitivity to double binds. Now, I suppose we could say that Barad is suggesting that we learn from quantum phenomena that there are constitutive opacities, indeterminacies, and contradictions which always accompany our theorizing, because they always accompany the fabric of existence. Yet I do worry that this has been taken as an invitation for abandoning methodological rigor or critique. If we were actually to increase, if we were to actually treat encounters between theories with the same precision and scrutiny as calculating diffraction patterns in physics, quantum physics, this could result in really interesting ways of imaging thought. And it seems more akin to Deleuzian diagrammatism, the methodological artistry of thinking that attempts to provide an image of the virtual elements and potential relations of systems, like a state of quantum coherence before the collapse of virtual states into actualized particulars. In another presentation, I drew connections between Deleuze's diagrammatism and Feynman's diagrams depicting scattering amplitudes. The point being that there's a similar intention to imagine probabilities or potentials. For Feynman, the combination of all possible paths that particles could travel, and for Deleuze, the virtual potentials inherent in an assemblage. Incidentally, Deleuze links fundamental encounter of paradox, the coexistence of contraries, to the genesis of thought itself and difference in repetition. Each of Feynman's diagrams represented not a particular path, but the sum of all paths, which creates a field. This method of analysis seems congruent to Deleuze's shift to mental diagrammatism needed to understand the indeterminate potentials of his system and the reference to the plane of imminence as an abstract machine which allows different degrees of freedom and generates new forms. Diagramming imagines the potentialities of the system rather than merely tracing what is there. But if this is all that I'm saying, that I prefer Deleuze's method of analysis or his expansion of terminology over Barad's, as it seems more likely to me that we can utilize it to imagine and construct new concept formations and trace the outcomes of the entanglements of our theories, ideas, and concepts, then this would be just a matter of a better calibration to the real. So in the latter part of this presentation, I want to claim that this is not just It's not just that Deleuze's manner of visualizing events or theories is better or more accurate to physics, it's that he offers a new image of thinking that addresses what it might be to think imminence or imminently, offering what I take to be an ethical prerogative for how to think and what needs to be thought in order to better align ourselves with the cosmos. Essentially, philosophy for Deleuze is about widening the purview of the virtual, interrogating our relation to it, and giving life to the qualitative dimensions of our said encounters. Instituting planes of imminence is a creative act of thought from which concepts are birthed, which can express imminence in new ways, which themselves direct experience and transform our relational matrices. Keeping in mind, of course, that our expressions are never isomorphic or to imminence, never representing the whole or the truth of reality. Also for me, at issue for me is the way that new materialists have co-opted Deleuze, claiming that Barad's methodological indeterminacy amounts to the ethical prioritization of remaining epistemologically humble and open, and this is actually from Catherine Thiel, who says that Barad's philosophy offers the most attuned image of thought for Deleuze and Guattari's founding plane of imminence. So the most attuned image of thought for Deleuze and Guattari's founding plane of imminence. So I just don't think that this is so. Whereas Barad uses quantum phenomena as models and then provides examples of how quantum principles can be overlaid on macroscopic phenomena, Deleuze provides conceptual tools for thinking the kind of phenomena which are beyond observation, the imperceptible, the incorporeal, the pre-individual, and advocates practices for overcoming identity, substantiality, and perceptual presence. Our concepts and theories then would act as virtual fields, sieves over chaos, which allow experiences to materialize in indeterminate ways and interact vis-a-vis encounters that are not necessarily pre-visible. I think this makes a subtle difference. Not using quantum ideas analogously in theorizing, but addressing how we think the quanta within our experience. I do think Barad is right that we are part of an ongoing process that impacts the materialization of the world. Thus, our practices and concepts formation lead us to different conclusions and contribute to the material configuration of the world, i.e., there is a role that we play in the materialization or actualization of the world. This would not be a transcendent role. There are other encounters, observers, if you will. But it seems to me that Barad takes this idea and eliminates the role of thought altogether in favor of what I find to be unsatisfactorily developed as the idea of discursive practices. And I'm not willing to do this. Quite frankly, I think it effectively eliminates the potential of philosophy altogether. Oh, why? Wow, okay. Oh, that is right, okay. So, thought's purview, affect and the imperceptible. So, this is another quote from Clay. Art expresses itself in its own language, throwing some light on the creative processes that largely develops in the unconscious to make secret visions visible. There's the quote actually from Clay himself. Deleuze's concept of and emphasis on affect is also uniquely conducive to helping us think beyond our classical epistemological foundations, beyond the reliance on pure observation or perception, and helps us reconceive the priorities or even possibilities of thought. Affects are results. They are also signs. They are perceptible, sensate results of the encounter between bodies or forces that precede them. Thus, the phenomenal is a sign of its preceding genetic encounter. Our epistemological purview, or transcendental empiricism, is to follow these signs. I love this quote, and I try to insert it into every talk that I give. Indifference from repetition, Deleuze says, the emerald hiding in its faces a bright-eyed water sprite. Thus, what we encounter is an affective grammar of these phenomenal flashes. Similarly, quanta are not observable in and of themselves. It's only when there is an encounter or an interaction that one can measure or identify a particular within a given field of potential quantum phenomena. Moreover, it's only through the intervention of experimental apparatus that these phenomena or events leave a trace that is detected by extremely sensitive machinery. The presence of imperceptible quantum events is noted through the affect that's created by their interaction. So one experiment I like very much, and this again comes from this Deleuze cosmology project. We actually were able to go to the SNOW lab, which is the Sudbury Neutrino Observation Lab, the deepest, cleanest lab in the world, where they're doing experiments that literally take up space that is like 100 meters high, and you have these huge experimental sort of assemblages that are meant to sort of be able to observe or trace these phenomena that occur like neutrinos, like once in every 400 billion particles you may find a neutrino, and it's very recently that we've been able to observe them. They've been successful at that at the SNOW lab in actually observing these phenomena, but it's very difficult. So one experiment that I like very much is it relies upon what's called scintillation in order to detect or mark the presence of elusive neutrinos. So scintillation is the physical process where a material called a scintillator emits UV or visible light under excitation from high energy photons. These momentary sparkles indicate the collision of quantum particles before which their existence is both virtual and imperceptible. For Deleuze, this vision of phenomenal flashings simultaneously indicates the material expressions of the relations on the cosmic plane and the intensive process whereby we, quote, begin to think, the fundamental encounter. In difference and repetition, a sign is this phenomenal event that occurs when something forces our faculties to communicate their intensive differences between one another, which produces a phenomenal flash, an affect. And this is actually the place where he invokes the emerald water sprite. The patterns of the universe, their differential relations and creative flashings are also the patterns of thought, not the same, but indicating the unique intertwinement of two as plays of intensive difference. Philosophically, and as I'll try to show, in alignment with Deleuze's own intuitions and concepts, this process illuminates the fact that the world expresses itself, or rather is an expression, a sensuous, cacophonic symphony of unpredictable encounters that we must strive to become sensitive towards. In physics, it's through highly attuned mechanisms, particle accelerators, scintillators, supercooling agents. We can see the aspects of slowness and speed, which Deleuze associates with the process of thought, incorporated into material components. So the supercooling agents will actually slow down the particles. There's also superheated agents, which when particles move through it, the liquid itself is so hot it's beyond boiling, but somehow within the mechanism that they're using, they can, I think through pressure or something, it won't boil, but as particles move through, they spontaneously combust, and then you see little bubbles that move through the liquid, and this is how you can identify different imperceptible particles. Okay, anyway, enough of that. So for philosophy then, we can try to imagine what it would mean to create images of thought that train thought to institute planes of eminence that induce speeds and slownesses, thus opening us to a wider array of encounter minuscule, imperceptible, rare, and extreme scintillations whose momentary flashings most often elude or pass right through us. Imminence. Beyond what implications each derive from quantum reality, what is fundamentally different between neo-materialists and Deleuze and separates his philosophy from a literalist translation of physics into philosophy concerns the concept of immanence. In his final book with Guattari, Deleuze claims, quote, "Immanence can be said to be the burning issue of all philosophy." The insistence on immanence is often interpreted in light of Deleuze's determination to eliminate the theological or transcendent impetus within philosophy. Yet, as Rowley claims, the greater impact is in refocusing philosophy, quote, on the level of our concrete involvement in the world, launching the renewal of ontological contemplation and generating new imaginings of what it is to live within a milieu of relational processes, where immanence is not immanent to consciousness, but suggests a field of immanence that is not conditioned upon anything else, out of which all entities and beings, concepts, and thoughts emerge. For Deleuze, thought is an attribute of immanence, and this complicates the picture because thinking immanence is not just about referring, but about unlocking a level of imaginative projection within thought about thought. This dual focus always accompanies Deleuze's philosophical gestures concerning immanence. Deleuze draws inspiration from his first inspiration for immanence from Spinoza. Maybe not first, but a lot of inspiration. Spinoza's monist philosophy explains the dual phenomena of extension and thought as attributes of a singular substance, quote, an infinity of attributes of which each expresses an internal and infinite essence. And further explains the multiplicity of actual entities as modes that exist and are conceived through these attributes. Deleuze identifies expression as the heart of Spinoza's account of immanence, claiming that, quote, univocal being ceases to be neutralized and becomes expressive with Spinoza. This statement has to be contextualized in terms of the tradition of dualism and representationalism with which Deleuze breaks. A neutralized view of being is one which stands eternal and unchangeable, a complete totality from which the world of things and ideas are merely representations or bland copies. Rather, univocal being as expressive hints at Deleuze's own ontology of dynamic becoming. Explication signals that certain features of immanence are quite literally folded out of or become externalized, actualized from infinite nature. And ontologically, immanence, a life, is prior to subject-object, which unfold from it. Substance immanence remains involved intensively, implicated as a series of variations that have not yet been separated or determined, i.e. virtually. Most fundamentally, we have a monist account of immanence, substance, expressing itself as both matter and thought, materiality and immateriality. And it would be a mistake to equate explicare with extensive bodies and implicare with thought. Both attributes contain an implicated and an explicated form of expression. Expression implies production of both matter and thought. So, new materialist Rosie Braidotti claims her vital materialism as an updated version of Spinozism. According to Braidotti, yes, I think. According to Braidotti, Spinoza's vital materialism implies that form is solely the outcome of autopoietic matter. Yet it's difficult to identify any trace of the duality that exists within Spinoza's substance here. Machinic autopoiesis is quite different than extension and thought as different attributes of the absolute, or following Deleuze's interpretation, two kinds of expression. And it has the, I think, unintended consequence of the attribute of thought falling away. So in reading many of the several articles where Braidotti talks about and reclaims Spinozism, she says it's a vital materialism or vital monism, and there's no reference. I mean, and there's something to this, but there's no reference to that monism, like no reference, no discussion of the attribute of thought, of meaning, etc. So I think that this is somewhat problematic. Where am I now? Contrarily, Deleuze doesn't claim that Spinoza's main contribution is vital materialism, but is instead the concept of immanence, which maintains a place for thought and materiality, the incorporeal and the corporeal. And for me, at least, the 13, sorry. And for me, at least, the paradox of... Oh, I'm so sorry. Hold on a second. Okay. Excuse me. Let me take a drink really quickly. And also ask what time it is. 10:30, okay. When did we start? Okay. So, and for me at least, so talking about sort of Deleuze's concept of imminence as opposed to sort of the sort of what I think it becomes a sort of what imminence seems to become, which is just materialism or vital materialism and new materialism. It has thought and materiality, the incorporeal and the corporeal. And for me, at least, the paradox of superpositionality in quantum physics, that something is both particle and wave, it helps me think about the monist duality of Spinoza's substance as both matter and thought. And this is not an analogy between matter and thought, but that reality is expressed as both simultaneously. I think that the paradox of quantum phenomena, that, quote, each individual photon must be considered to feel out both routes that are open to it, but it remains one photon, may help us think this difficult thought of immanence. Because of Deleuze's insistence on the incorporeal, for Deleuze, events occurring on the plane of immanence are both material and incorporeal, actual and virtual, as well as qualitative and quantitative. We could say that what really arises from this delineation is the need to think both a vital materiality and a vital ideality. Thus, Deleuze's philosophy can never be merely another description of the physical or referential, what some have called a philosophical naturalism. Therefore, commentators who've located an irreducible level of metaphorization within their use of scientific concepts may be correct, but it's neither akin to the literality nor the analogization that Barad practices. It's a kind of transversal relation between matter and thought. Deleuze is more than just inspired to create new philosophical concepts and ideas about matters of science or matter itself. Imminence recognizes a synergy and a coexistence between thought and material physical existence, which requires a move beyond naive physicalism or any materialism that reduces our contemplation of thought to its mere material aspects. Bergson, images of imminence. So Deleuze's question concerning imminence have two flavors. What is imminence, the ontological question, and how do we think it? Especially when our thought is trained or its natural speed follows the path of classical physics and our perception is limited to observable phenomena. Deleuze's understanding of immanence, especially with respect to the importance of the virtual and the limitations of thought itself, derives from Bergson, who distinguishes two sides to the absolute, differentiated in terms of quantitative being and qualitative being. According to Bergson, things are composed of both extended matter, which differs in degree, and have their own duration, or memory, which cannot be cut up into discontinuous fragments, but must be considered as an internally variable qualitative whole that is carried along with its various modes of actualized existence. We're accustomed to thinking of the world in finite and quantitative units, but Bergson argues for a more fundamental level of reality, which he calls duration, a virtual qualitative continuous multiplicity. Imminence invokes the character of the event as a whole with its infinite proliferation of senses, pointing beyond any singular moment or individual life to which may be considered a cosmic life that subtends its variegated manifestations. Bergson says that we have glimpses of this ontological duration which involuntarily come to us through our own experience and encounters. And I love this quote. He says, "It comes into view like a condensing cloud. From the virtual state, it passes into the actual." Which is why Deleuze often resorts to examples of creative experimentation, which are geared towards the provocation of our sensibilities and the thwarting of expectations in order to produce a new awareness, or what Panzer claims, quote, to develop a sensibility that can detect the form of potential embedded in what escapes recognition. Bergson's vision of immanence invokes the ontology of the image, whose status is, quote, more than a representation, but less than that what we would call a realist thing. The reality of universal variation makes itself known through the image, which is really the encounter between forces or intensities which makes reflection. Reality is, according to Bergson, an aggregate of images, which constantly reflect each at infinite speed, constituting a plane of immanence. This vision of infinite reflecting images suggests that at its core, the world is comprised of a conglomeration of affective expressions, each encounter producing a scintillation which becomes reflected by other images, a bouncing, vibratory plane of encounters, making its presence known in affective expression. And this is one of the actual experiments. This is a huge, like 30-foot high, maybe even more. This is the scintillator. And there are reflective lights that are on the outside of this globe, or inside of this globe. And there's scintillating material within the inside. And as neutrinos pass through, it makes momentary sparks that we wouldn't even be able to see with our bare eye. But they're actually detected by the cameras and the reflective surface. And then they're coagulated at a computational level in order to produce images. The ability to receive and maintain reflections by creating an interval or space of capture in which the infinite speed of interactions and reflection is slowed down means that we have begun to orient reality according to one image, our own, which provides a frame of reference through which we stabilize all and interpret all others in a system which, quote, all images vary for one single image. But this is not the only possibility of thought or perception. And it seems clear from Deleuze's privileging of the crystal image that thought's aim should be to maximize and multiply the facets through which we encounter the cosmos and thus open ourselves to the scintillating reality of infinite reflections, disorienting ourselves so that we might dislodge our false sense of centrality and partake in a different mode of reflection, rediscovering the matrix of movement at the heart of the universe. Bergson illuminates the barrier to thought or to thinking otherwise, that the tendency of natural human perception to assume fixed, instantaneous view obscures the dual nature of images, hypostasizing the state of things in constant change and obscuring our ability to experience a world of universal variation. We could say that this parallels the tendency of our thought to operate on what one might call a Newtonian scale, to identify molar points through which we can reduce the underlying complexities, mobilities, and potentialities of reality. Bergson advocates the cultivation of a new kind of perceptual experience where rather than the interval being filled with that which sustains or stabilizes or attends merely to the interests of the individual, we cultivate an openness to other durations. And you may hear those of you at the camp, this is where I would sort of insert that idea of revolutionary love as a way of sort of being a different spatial arrangement and immersion within the world. That the mind creates a reduction of the world to unchanging matter and becomes blind to the potentialities of duration, the virtual or fluid level of existence, is the problem to be overcome. The intuition that he has to overcome the hypostasizing and spatializing forces of the intellect to open ourselves to a more cosmic level of images in their variation and relations is inspirational and most certainly applauded by Deleuze. Whereas Bergson suggests at some level the limitation of thought are essential, this is, I think, the difference, Deleuze shifts to the idea that the limitation is of our own making, a fault of imagination, and that we can discover a new image of thought that propels us further in our abilities to think and at or of infinite speeds. He's interested in releasing thought from its straitjacket, providing an image of thought that is more responsive to milieu and shifting circumstances. Thinking must become nimble, mobile, and capable of withstanding paradoxical multiplicities. What is philosophy? And I have maybe 5 minutes left. And 1,000 plateaus. How to think imminence. So in What is Philosophy, Deleuze and Guattari reinforce the simultaneity of thinking and materiality and thought, the differential monism inherited from Spinoza, which through Bergson becomes a matter of movement, dilation, and contraction. They advance new and often perplexing descriptions meant to invoke the difficulty of thinking immanence or confronting imminence in thought, moving through a dizzying number of characterizations, a single wave, void, horizon, formless, unlimited, absolute, neither surface nor volume, but always fractal, indivisible milieu, a milieu that moves infinitely in itself, a desert that concepts populate without dividing up, pre-philosophical, and of course, chaos. And I think, and I'd said this before in the camp, I think that it's not just meant to confuse us, but the idea of holding these different images together is one of the aspects of this new image of thought that has to be thought. So contradiction and paradox as central to a new mode of thinking. So Arkady Plotnitsky observes, Deleuze's immanence includes both chaos at infinite speed, so epistemological chaos or incomprehensibility, and fundamental indeterminacy, ontological chaos, and irreducible real unpredictability. So I think thinking must account for both. If immanence is purely infinite speed, where materiality and the ideal are reconfigured as different modes of vibratory being, this is from Bergson, the problem becomes one of thought's response to infinite speed. So the problem is bidirectional, quote, to acquire a consistency without losing the infinite into which thought plunges. Either slowing down to the point of losing the connection with life, so this is Bergson's critique of perception, or speeding up too much as to lose oneself to a fascist or cancerous body without organs. So remember, I mean, Deleuze is not just sort of advocating some pure sort of going off into the stratosphere, we're going to just deterritorialize ourselves. Absolutely. I mean, there's a way that thinking can lose itself and lose itself, unfortunately, to fascistic ideas, activities, etc., and the process. This manner of thinking about the act of philosophic thinking retains Bergson's distinction. Speed of relay versus the interval of thought, which slows down direct action or connection. Rather than thought directed by self-preservation or survival, thought would be directed towards infinite speed. So we must ask ourselves, what does or should philosophy do? And of course, this is the point of what is philosophy. Philosophy is at once concept creation and instituting of the plane, but specifically giving the virtual a consistency specific to it, giving consistency to the virtual through concepts. If chaos as disorder pertains to nature itself, philosophical concepts must be designed not to just give consistency or slow down chaos, but to address the realities of the infinite speed and the contingency of chaos itself. The chaos of the virtual is not incomprehensible. It's just not totalizable. I think there's a difference there. It's not incomprehensible, it's just not totalizable, which constitutes a necessary shift in our thinking, or a necessary shift in the image of thought itself. The shorthand for me is that philosophy can move thought in another direction, as they say, instituting thinking within thought, through instituting new planes of immanence, i.e. the plane of immanence is not a concept that is or can be thought, but rather the image of thought. The image thought gives itself of what it means to think. Thinking becomes a matter of following the unfolding of the cosmic universe and creating concepts that address the singularity of events. And many of you from the camp will recognize this idea of following the lines and divination that I was developing as a counterpart to this concept of thinking. So the creative as opposed to the representational or referential. To think is to create, they say in difference and repetition. So Deleuze and Guattari situate philosophy's activity as a constant negotiation between the plane of immanence as an impersonal field of ontological dynamism and instituting a plane of immanence. So they use it in this double way, and I think you must always retain both as a matter of filtering through a particular image of thought. While, as Holland explains, quote, the circumstance that provokes thought is chaos, the infinity of determinations that comprise the complexity of the cosmos, to institute a plane of immanence is to be chaosmotic, is not to replicate or represent chaos. So concepts are centers of vibration which resonate rather than cohere or correspond. This is a selective process, and no one concept or plane is ever one with the virtual infinite, which would be never exhausted. So this is, again, the difference between a sort of representation of reality that science tries to achieve and what I think philosophy and our thinking, this new image of thought, would be about. I think, so this final point is crucial. This formulation suggests that an act of thought, that more than an act of thought surveying being, but concepts impact and transform us, putting us into relation with the durational whole which our perspectival awareness limits. The philosophical concept is meant in true Bergsonian form to widen our window on the virtual, and increase our awareness of the movement of duration. Okay, so Deleuze and Guattari constantly emphasize the ceaseless rumbling within being, beneath our transcendent ideas. Philosophy aims to repotentiate the virtual with the hope of actualizing it differently. Though I'm not sure that the aims of quantum physics always point in this direction, this gives us pause to consider how and why Deleuze's philosophy and quantum physics are such interesting counterparts in theorizing and imagining. It's true that quantum physics has features we associate with Deleuze's virtual. Uncertainty principle assumes a virtual field of potentials, etc. But for Deleuze, Deleuze's ontology of immanence, with its superpositioning of the virtual and actual, mind and matter, or thought and materiality, mirrors the characterization of the world as a, quote, quantum superposition of histories of real and virtual interacting particles. For Deleuze, these are features of the immanent field that it insists within individuated being, indeterminate, virtual, and intensive. Deleuze, however, is interested in this world, recognizing these features must be taken up to create new images of thought, which in turn provide the necessary interval, space, or opening for transforming political and ethical life, and resisting the standard view or status quo mentality that easily begins to blanket and control our world. I'm suggesting that physics and philosophy themselves resonate in a creative way. Quantum physics offering potential strategies to be taken up in thought and how to think. Philosophy potentially responding by creating new paths of thought and images of immanence. Thus, rather than creating a new image of thought, Deleuze is inspired to think thought without image, not a rejection of images, but a recognition that one must always think beyond the image to the genetic conditions and welcome the layering of image upon image, reflection upon reflection, building up a tolerance for the infinite variation that swirls around us. Deleuze's aspirations for thought are quite vast. Deleuze is forever associated with the Spinoza's claim that we do not know what a body can do, yet in what I take to be a highly overlooked passage from Difference and Repetition, Deleuze insinuates that there's much more we have yet to discover about thought. Not only has the assumption of common sense disallowed us from understanding the true limits and unique passion of each faculty, but there may be, quote, faculties yet to be discovered whose existence is not yet suspected. This is why I come back to Deleuze's diagrammatic thinking. Diagrammatism is not merely tracing, but constructing, organizing, proposing new constellations of relations. Above all, it's a creative enterprise. Thought needs to become a cosmic artisan. It's not an idealism that suggests that humans construct reality, but as an acknowledgement of the convergence of art, ontology, and epistemology. To think is to multiply the facets, the images through which we engage and are reflected on the plane of immanence. Thus, the project of transforming our image of thought is also an ethical one that extends beyond our understanding, extends our understanding of our place in the world and responsibilities to it. Deleuze, as Bergson before him, wants us to transform ourselves so that we can experience and engage with more of the world, to be worthy of the event, of immanence, and of the cosmos. The future of thought is thought which engages more profoundly with cosmological existence and should be read alongside Deleuze's call for a new earth and a new people that embraces the chaotic cosmic potentials that pass through and are reflected in us.